I got the fourth double H brace up, which represents the fourth corner of our 80 by 80 foot garden. The next phase of the project is to install 2 more H braces to allow the gate to have something to close against. And we have 2 gates. We have this 4-foot one and that one way back there. I think it's 10 foot that I just got from Tractor Supply on sale. We decided to do something new this time. In our Raleigh homestead, we put the hinges on the inside of, I guess what you would call the jamb, like between the 2 posts. That allows it to swing either way, but it has a limited range of motion. By the time it gets like, I don't know, 3/4 of the way past closed to the open position, it bottoms out against the post. So it's always in the way for something. So if we put the hinges on the outside, obviously it won't be able to open inward, but it'll be able to fully open outward, represented by where the gate is right now. You can swing all the way, hit the fence, and then we could even have a mechanism like a chain or a hook or a bungee cord to lock it open. That way when we're bringing tools and wagons, and we have all this wind, you probably hear it, we have huge gusts of wind up on the mountain. We don't want the gate swinging and hitting people's vehicles and messing up paint and stuff like that. So I just stuck this tamping rod here where the next post needs to be, and it has to be slightly into the opening because the gate has to hit against it. It has to hit something to hold it closed. Otherwise, it'll swing too far and it'll go into the garden a bit, and then it'll just be like flapping there, and we don't want that. You know, I don't know everything about fencing. I've only done this once, and I've never had livestock, so I don't really know all the ramifications of that. This is just a garden fence. So we'll have a full fence post here made of wood. We'll have a full H brace, and then we'll have another vertical piece. One of the problems though is we have a frost-free hydrant here, and this H brace crosses right over. You can see the disturbed ground from when I had a trenching machine. That's where a 120 volt electrical wire, directed burial rated, is. And in the same trench is a 1/2 inch PEX water line. And those go down probably like 18 to 20 inches. The frost line here is 18 inches. And we put the fence posts down deeper than that. So I might have to cut this H brace short and put it on one side or the other, depending on, I guess, where the actual thing is located. I'll have to dig down to find out. So anyway, that's what we have to look forward to. So, I'm gonna get back to work. All right, YouTube, we have this gate installed. I'm really happy about that. Typically, I would install all of the fencing before putting the gates in, but because of this new technique we're mounting it to the outside, I wanted to mount this first, swing it closed against a placeholder, and that way we'll know where the edge, I guess the minimum edge, needs to be. Obviously, the fence post could be within the gate somewhere. We just need something for it to slam onto. So now that I have this nice tick mark in the ground, it's time to dig a pilot hole and then get the auger out again and put one of these 2 fence posts down in this hole. Make sure it fits, backfill it, water it, make sure it's nice and solid and exactly where we want it to go before we continue the H-brace. And one thing I wanted to point out that I neglected to say in my earlier statement is that the reason you can't have a freestanding post against a gate is because you're going to tension the fence against this. Obviously, the fence can't continue over there connecting to that H-brace because there's a gap here. When this is open, all of the tension of like the 70 so remaining feet of this fence line is going to be pulling on this post. And over time, if this was unsupported with an H-brace and some diagonal bracing, it's going to fall over like this, and then the gate won't have anything to close against anymore. That's that. Let's get started. It's raining today on the homestead. There's a bit of a gap in the weather, so I'm going to start doing my diagonal bracing on the H braces. It's called an H brace because you have 2 verticals and then a horizontal roughly 2/3 of the way up of the fence line. That makes it an H. It actually looks closer to halfway up, but that's because we're not actually putting fencing all the way to the top of these. They say you should do 2/3 to the top of the fence. Anyway, you need the diagonal bracing because once you start tensioning your fence, you don't want it to pull the fence post over. It's been a long time since I've done this, several years, but I've had success in the past using these. It's kind of like a turnbuckle, but it ratchets instead. You have to use this special handle tool to crank these. But you can see there's a little hole there. So you attach wire to one side, wire to the hole, and then once you crank it, it'll lock and keep that tension. And then over time, as everything settles, the posts move, expansion and contraction due to winter weather, things like that, you can continuously crank it. The old school method you might see around some like large pastures is they have a diagonal brace with like a piece of metal or scrap of wood in it, and they can crank that wood around and hook it on the H brace to prevent it from unwinding and spinning back around. I think I've tried to do that once, but the gauge wire we have is so thick that it's almost impossible to get it to tension like that. And also, once I put the fencing up, it blocks that handle from being able to freely spin. So I don't understand how it's supposed to be used. Maybe it only is used on fences that just have wires going across instead of like a grid fence panel that we have. Ours is it's not welded wire. I think it's called a woven wire fence. Anyway, I have a technique that works. I'm gonna use it. So the first thing to do is remember which way the diagonal needs to go. This is the post that we need to keep upright and prevent it from going that way with the fence line. So in turn, we have to make sure this horizontal post does not move that way with the fence line. So to do that, we have to keep this one upright to push that one against that post. So our diagonal top goes here and our diagonal bottom goes there. I'm gonna do a time lapse of me installing this, and then we will reconvene and like talk about how that's gonna work. Hopefully I do it right. I just wanted to slow things down just to explain a bit more about what I'm working on here. You can see I just drove a staple most of the way in around the same height as the horizontal H brace on the left side, and then I put a corresponding staple on the right side but towards the bottom. The way I look at it is that since we're trying to brace this against being pulled to the left, I start the wire on the bottom right going up to the top left. That way it'll push the horizontal brace to the right, counteracting the tension of the fence. So instead of measuring and creating like a formula and trying to roll out this spool of wire, I actually just keep the wire spool nearby, run the wire, and then just leave about a foot extra so I have some room to work. Basically what I'm doing is coiling the wire using my wire tying tool just in a lasso formation where it goes through the staple, wraps around the post, and then hooks back onto itself. And where it hooks, I continue to coil it like a little pigtail around and around as tight as possible. And as you can see, the wire is a bit droopy, but that's okay because I'm not actually tensioning it in this step. Once I get these coils locked on each side, then I'm going to stand on the wire, try to pull as much tension out of it as possible to tighten those lassos on either end, and then I'm going to cut it right in the middle. One thing I should mention, though, is that it's important to drive those staples full depth into the sides of the fence posts so your lassos cannot slip back out later. This wire is very thick and I don't actually have appropriate cutters, so I have to put all of my strength in two hands for these crappy little pliers that I have. But then I'm essentially doing another little loop so I can attach one end securely to the ratcheting turnbuckle. The other end of the wire is a bit easier to install because I just bend the wire at a 90-degree angle and shove it right through the wheel on the turnbuckle. So now that it's loosely installed, I can start to tension it with the handle. Now that I've put tension on all of the H braces, it's time to move on to the second gate. At this point, you've seen me assemble H braces using wooden fence posts for every corner and every side of the gate. Now we just need to connect the dots by installing metal T-posts. These ones are a bit oversized, but that's because we might want to add another wire or two across the top of the fence, and it's important to have somewhere to mount them to, so the wire is not just flapping in the wind. When I hammer fence posts, I use this T-post driver. It's designed specifically for this task. They do make them with different weights, and I don't remember exactly how much ours weighs, but I think it is a bit on the smaller side to save some money and to save some effort on my shoulders. But the most important thing for me is for them to be vertical and evenly spaced. I lay out my measuring tape between the wooden fence posts, and then I divide that until I find a number between 8 and 12 feet. I place rocks at each of these measurements just as a placeholder, and then I kick that rock out of the way as I place the metal T-post. I keep the string line up until I'm done with all the fence posts. That way I can keep it tight and it'll show me a straight line representing where the fence line will be. For my first round of using the T-post driver, I'm essentially just tacking them into place so I can step back and visualize how the completed fence is going to look. When I say tack, I'm just giving it maybe 5 or 6 hits just to get down to where that fin is. There's the stabilization fin, which once buried makes it very difficult to remove these. So I definitely don't want to hit it all the way into the ground until I know that that's where I want it. Once I tack all of these in place, then I can go back around using my magnetic level to make sure these are plumb and true before I drive them the rest of the way into the ground. Now that all of the bracing is done and all of the fence posts are permanently installed, it's time to get ready to uncoil this fence roll that's been sitting here for about a year. The south side of the fence encroaches a bit into this wild pasture area that I left long all summer last year to let the flowers grow. I definitely needed to mow that back because once I put the fence up, all of those weeds essentially are going to be in my way, and I'm not going to be able to mow it for a while until the fence gets tightened. And even then, I might have to go around with a weed whacker to really get under the fence line itself. Trying to move this big roll of wire is very unruly. I have no idea how much it actually weighs, but because it's so loose and wobbly, it makes it a lot more difficult to lift. So I find the easiest way is to just roll it around. Thankfully, I had the foresight last summer to place it where I estimated our corner of the garden to be. That way I could leave one end behind, kind of tied off onto something, while I unroll the fence across the south side of where the garden's going to be. And then I can essentially just unroll it, lifting it up just at the corners to change my trajectory, and then just keep rolling it out length by length. Once it's laid out, I have to start thinking about how I'm going to do my first termination. And that's where things get a bit tricky, and I'm going to walk you through that process right now. Basically, what we're trying to do here is have horizontal pieces of wire that we can wrap around a fence post and pigtail it back onto itself for maximum holding strength. I'm sure you could use enough staples on each of these horizontal wires to keep it secure, but I kind of like the look of it wrapping around and corkscrewing, pigtailing back onto itself. I don't know the true terminology of that, but you saw what I was doing before with my little coiling tool. This tool is very important because without it, you'd have to manually handle this with pliers. But this tool is hinged and it allows you to reach through the fence, hook it on the wire, and pull it back through. But then you can reverse the tool and push it around the next side. So you basically get a full pass without having to retool the wire. Wrapping the wire back onto itself after going around the fence post is pretty straightforward using this tool, because that's about all this tool is good for. That's why it exists, and that's why everyone who installs agricultural fences has one in their tool belt. But now I need to tell you how I even got that horizontal slack to wrap it around the post in the first place. But before I explain that in more detail, I'm going to just let you watch time lapses, and then I'll slow things down for you like I've been doing throughout this series. So stick around. Well, now it's time to get into the details. Let's start off with this tensioning jig that I built back on our Raleigh homestead. It consists of two 2x4 scraps, roughly the same height as the roll of fencing, then evenly spaced carriage bolts that allow you to lock the fence inside the sandwich of 2x4s. That way you can grab the 2x4s anywhere with ratchet straps and pull them tight. And then all you need is a tractor, a truck, a heavy lawnmower, a tree, or maybe just an extra fence post you have in the ground to act as a sturdy point of contact to pull the ratchet strap against. I like to use two ratchet straps, one to tension the top of the fence and one to tension the bottom. But however you decide to do it, it needs to be within the same plane of your fence line. So once that anchor point takes the weight, you can then start to staple the fence pieces to the fence posts and start to cut the wires away, which is the next step of the process that I'll explain now. Basically what we're doing is cutting every other horizontal wire so that most of the tension remains, but you have enough slack to actually start to attach it to the fence post while also keeping the fence wire under tension. But when I say every other one, please note that you should not cut the top or the bottom thick wire until the end, just because these are so strong, they could be under so much tension that it could cause something catastrophic to happen if you cut them prematurely. So this is a scenario where I would encourage you to go ahead and measure how much slack you need to completely surround that fence post and wrap back onto itself. But you only need to measure if you're worried about conserving your fence. If you have too much fence, you can always just cut way more than you need, and then before you wrap that little pigtail back around itself, you can just cut it to the appropriate length. So once you know how much slack you need, you can go ahead and cut every other wire to that same length. But then you have to worry about the vertical pieces. What I like to do is chop them right in the middle between the two horizontals, and then just using brute strength and some pliers, gradually loosen those factory twists to try to get those little loops off and completely remove the vertical pieces. I just like the clean look of a terminated end wrapped around the fence post, but if you want to leave that wire vertically and just have vertical pieces strapped directly to the fence post, that's entirely up to you. I definitely recommend getting a bucket or a stool to sit on because you're going to be down in this position for a long time trying to get those factory twists out. They're very tight and it's going to take a lot of strength to remove them. You can see I'm getting a significant pile of those little scraps down there. You definitely want to make sure you pick all those up and dispose of them properly because they're really sharp and you don't want to suck them up in the lawnmower. So sometimes I like to wrap the horizontal piece around the fence post and terminate it properly before I move on to the next one. Other times I'd like to clip them in bulk and then loop them all around the fence post at the same time. It all depends on how my grip strength feels and how my muscles are giving out and how fatigued I'm getting. It's up to you how you want to do it. Just keep that rule of thumb in mind that you want to save the top and bottom wires until the end. By that point, they're going to be relatively loose because all the wires that you've already cinched around the fence post are going to take the weight. I like to risk it and just chop the wires and let my clamp jig over by the truck fall over. But if you want, you could go take that jig off or loosen the ratchet straps just to guarantee that there's no tension that's going to risk the wire whipping back and hitting you in the face. Like I said, this is going to be very tedious and very tough on your grip strength and your muscles. So just sit back, be patient, take your time, maybe just knock out one fence post termination and then put all your tools away and come back the next day. With a square situation like we have, I was able to go around a corner and then go to the next H-brace, which is next to a gate, before I terminate it. So you don't actually have to terminate on every corner as long as you can keep the tension tight with some staples. We have a roughly symmetrical design, being a square, having doors on opposite corners. We basically have two equal lengths of fencing, each with two terminations. I just mentioned that it's possible to keep the fence tensioned while wrapping around a corner without terminating it. So I just wanted to show you again how I do that. I'm attaching my double 2x4 jig brace tensioner thing that I made. I'm attaching that to the truck, which is perfectly in plane with the rest of the fence line. I'm securing the top and the bottom wires after I get it tensioned with one of those big fencing staples. And just for some reinforcement, I'm adding a staple to one of the horizontal wires about halfway up the fence. And then I'm just rolling the rest of that fence line over there past the gate. I'm doing it past the gate because, as you know, I'm going to have to cut some of the vertical wires off and then wrap the horizontal around that fence post in the screen there to the left. And if I keep the gate opened, it's going to be in the way. As you can see, I'm actually taking it off the hinge to make it a bit easier to work flush with that fence post. But the only way to keep the fence tensioned in the same plane, where it's so close that I can actually staple it to that post, is to bring it past and attach it to the truck over there. It might be possible to attach it to that end fence post, but I don't really want the ratchet strap handle rubbing on the fence while I'm trying to tension it. Seems a bit dangerous, so this was the safest method I could think of. You can see how I have one strap in the middle of the tensioner and one at the bottom. I basically move that up and down wherever it needs to be based on which wire is the tightest and which is the loosest. In this case, I wanted the bottom to be a bit tighter, so that's why there's a strap on the bottom. But I'm certainly capable of stapling each wire as it's tensioned, and then I can move the ratchet strap as I see fit to either the top or the bottom, and then apply more staples as necessary. So now I'm doing my standard termination process, wrapping the wires around, using my little curly tool to wrap the wire back around itself, and here's the finished gate. Now that the ends of the fences are terminated and fully tensioned, it's time to clip the fence wire to these T-posts using these little twist tie things designed specifically for T-posts. I simply use my little wire twisting tool to get a grip on the wire and loop it around. Well, good news, friends. The fence is pretty much done. I ran out of staples. I could use a couple more. I also need a few of those little wire ties that hold the fence to the T-posts. But let me show you what we did. We have this small 4-foot man door here that closes against the fence post just like I intended. We have 80 foot by 80 foot square. We have H braces on either side of every corner. We have the T-posts in the ideal range for T-post spacing, which I believe is like 8 to 12 feet. Our longer spans, I put them a bit closer together. Our shorter spans, I went longer because it's really the H braces with that diagonal that holds all of the tension. And we're not using this for livestock, so I'm not too concerned about having the tightest, most secure fence. In fact, I might even just do one little wire tie here at the top and one at the bottom. Let me know down in the comments if you have any best practices for fencing that you think I could benefit from. I'm not opposed to gradually improving this over time as our needs change. Like we've said before, we have this silage tarp. I believe it's 54 feet by 40. And we kind of keep moving that down season to season to kill the grass, kill the weeds, break everything down into a usable compost for the next season's crops. What we're planning to do is start a permaculture garden. All of that conceptually is new to me. I know you're kind of not supposed to do row crops in permaculture. You're supposed to follow more organic living principles, trying to emulate natural processes. So over on the north fence line, over by the pickup truck over there, we started our hugelkultur bed. We're gonna have some berries and other plants on top of that, probably a fruit tree on each side, and we're gonna have like a small food forest along the north fence line. We're trying to stick to dwarf or semi-dwarf trees because we don't wanna have like massive trees where we need ladders and stuff to harvest everything. So that's over there. Over here is last year's garden, and over there is the new ground, which I believe we can use for some row crops. We're gonna try to do a bit of a hybrid approach because we need mass-produced row crops if we're going to sell anything at the farmers markets. And so we're gonna try that and not really have a full permaculture design this year, with the exception of trees to the north, crops to the south. But you might be wondering, what are we gonna use this third for? Well, we have the chicken coop there. We're gonna have a chicken tractor here, and then the beehives over here. We might move these closer to the fence. Not exactly sure about the bees, but we need this kind of big area to move our meat birds daily. We want to have them forage as much as possible. We're not going to use those massive Cornish cross birds that make up 99% of the chicken market here in the US. Those are pretty lazy birds, might be the best description. They basically just get too big to forage. And we're going to have, I think they're called rangers. It's a good meat bird, takes a bit longer to raise than a Cornish cross, but they are going to eat some of the wild forage we have on the property. This area has never been sprayed, as far as I know, with pesticides. We don't use chemicals or anything in our garden that would run off. So I think this is an ideal spot in the fence, at least this year, to experiment with meat birds. And then in this corner is where our egg birds are going to live full time. They're not going to have a chicken tractor, but they do have this modified dog house. I can lift it up and put it on legs to give them a sheltered space for the rain. We're going to have to reinforce like a run area for them because the spacing of this wire fence is going to be too big to keep them contained, at least in their juvenile phase. So anyway, if you want to see any of these projects, go ahead and subscribe to our channel, and I'll see you back here next time on Kind Heart Homestead. Thanks for watching.